6 screens, 6 camera feeds, and Baek Jung-hyun is watching every single one like a man reading his own autopsy report. He does this every day, every lunch period, 11 months straight, because the last time he wasn't watching, his wife died in a parking lot 30 meters from where his daughter eats lunch. So now he watches. From his office across the city, through encrypted feeds, through glass and wire and distance. Because distance is what Baek Jung-hyun does best. Camera 4, the cafeteria, table 9. His daughter sits where she always sits, back to the room. Lunchbox pressed against her hip like a lifeline, eating with one hand, holding the lunchbox handle with the other. 7 years old and she eats lunch like a woman waiting for a train she doesn't want to catch. Same table, same wall, same silence, every single day for 11 months. Then a woman Jung-hyun has never seen before walks across the cafeteria carrying a tray. She's black. She's wearing a kitchen uniform dusted with flour, and she sits down at table 9, directly across from his daughter. Jung-hyun's hand moves to the phone. One call. That's all it would take. 30 seconds and that woman would be escorted out of the building, fired, deported. He's done it before. He'll do it again. His daughter is the only thing in this world he cannot afford to lose twice. But then Somin tilts her head. Her shoulders drop half an inch, and she does something she has not done in 11 months. She laughs. Not the polite, mechanical laugh she gives her aunt when she's performing obedience. This is the laugh that starts in the belly and curls the whole body forward. This is the laugh she used to give her mother. Jung-hyun's hand freezes on the phone. He doesn't call, he doesn't breathe, he just watches. For 22 minutes, he watches the stranger in a flour-dusted apron make his daughter sound alive again. And then the camera catches something else. Somin reaches into the lunchbox. The lunchbox she carries everywhere, the lunchbox she sleeps with. And she pulls out a phone, a Samsung with a cracked screen. A phone Jung-hyun reported destroyed 11 months ago the night it disappeared from the evidence locker along with his wife's blood-soaked jacket. His wife's phone. The phone the police told him was never recovered. The phone his head of security, Shin Dong-chul, swore was lost in the chaos of the crime scene. It's been in a 7-year-old's lunchbox this entire time, and right now, his daughter is showing it to a stranger. But here's the thing that will keep you up tonight, besties. The question isn't who this woman is. The question is why a 7-year-old has been hiding a dead woman's phone for 11 months, eating lunch alone every single day so nobody would sit close enough to see it. What is on that phone that she's so terrified to let anyone hear? And what made her decide, today of all days, that this woman, this cook she's known for 15 days, is the one person in the world she trusts enough to show it to? If you want to find out what's on that voicemail and why it will bring the most powerful man in Seoul's underworld to his knees in a school parking lot, do me a solid. Hit that subscribe button right now, like this video, and settle in. Because this story is about to rip your heart out, stitch it back together, and rip it out again. You are not ready, but stay anyway. 15 days earlier, Afua Mensah's hands were burning and her Korean was broken, and Madame Go had just called her something she didn't understand but was fairly sure wasn't a compliment. First day, Daesung International Academy, the kind of school where the tuition costs more than Ifua's mother made in 5 years selling kelawele at the Kumasi Central Market. The kind of school with a swimming pool and a philosophy teacher and parents who arrived in cars that cost more than houses. Afua was not a parent, Afua was the new cafeteria cook. The one who got the job because it was the only kitchen position in Incheon that didn't require fluent Korean, just fast hands and a willingness to wake up at 4 in the morning. She was 26, Ghanaian, a Khan from Kumasi, 6,000 miles from the kitchen where her mother, Auntie Amma, taught her that feeding someone is the closest thing to prayer. You want to know if a woman loves you, her mother used to say, watch if she saves you the last piece. Love is not what you say. Love is what you put on the plate. Afua sent 70% of her paycheck home. She ate leftovers standing up by the industrial sink after the lunch rush. She lived in a one-room in Bupyeong with a mattress on the floor and a hot plate that only worked on the second try. She didn't complain. She had come here to work, and she worked. Hands in dough by 5, soup on the burner by 6, 400 lunches plated and served by noon. She moved through that kitchen the way her mother moved through hers, quiet, focused, invisible. But Afua noticed things. She had always noticed things. Her father used to say she had aniwa, eyes that see what isn't being shown. He died when she was 9. Heart attack in the maize field behind their house. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody except Afua, who had noticed 3 days. Before that, her father's hands were shaking when he poured water, and his breathing sounded like it was coming from somewhere farther away than his chest, she told her mother. Her mother said she was imagining things. 3 days later, her father was gone, and Afua learned the lesson that would define the rest of her life. When you notice something, you act, because the people who wait are the ones who end up standing over a body, wishing they'd said something sooner. Day 1, she noticed the girl. Table 9, back wall. The cafeteria was a chaos engine. 300 children between the ages of 5 and 12, and every single one of them was making noise. Trays slamming, milk cartons being weaponized, someone screaming about stolen tteokbokki. It was beautiful, actually. The sound of children being children. The sound of a world that was working. But table 9 was silent. A 7-year-old girl sat alone, back to the room, not facing the window, not facing the door, not facing anything she might want to look at, facing the wall. She ate with one hand. The other hand gripped the handle of a blue insulated lunchbox pressed against her left hip. She held that lunchbox the way soldiers hold their rifles, close, ready, like she might need to run. She was small for 7, thin in a way that wasn't natural, that was chosen. The thin of a child who has decided that eating is optional but holding on to something is not. Her hair was cut in a bob that was growing out unevenly. Her school uniform was slightly too big. Her socks were sliding down. And she was humming, very quietly, a melody Afua didn't recognize. The same melody, every single day. Afua watched from the kitchen pass through window. Day 2. Day 3, day 5. Same table, same wall, same hum, same grip on the lunchbox. Cross it. No one sat with her. No child approached. No teacher checked. It was as if the entire cafeteria had drawn an invisible circle around table 9 and collectively decided not to. On day 3, Afua asked, the kitchen ajuma, a stout woman named Mrs. Cheon, who'd been working the cafeteria for 11 years and had opinions about everything, barely looked up from the rice cooker. That's the Beck child. Don't what? Don't anything. Her father built this school. He watches the cameras. You see those little black dots on the ceiling? Every single one of them feeds to his office. He sees everything. If you go near her, talk to her, so much as look at her too long, you will be gone before your shift ends. Do you understand? Ifua understood. She understood powerful men and their cameras and their control. She grew up in Kumasi, where the chief's compound had eyes in every wall, and nobody spoke above a whisper within 100 meters of the gate. She understood that power protects by isolating, that the safest child is the loneliest child, that surveillance is just another word for distance. She also understood that a 7-year-old girl was eating lunch alone every single day and nobody was doing a damn thing about it. Day 7, day 10, day 13. Afua kept her head down. She cooked, she plated, she served, she watched, and every day the girl sat at table 9 and hummed and held that lunchbox like it was the only friend she had left. Day 15, a Thursday. Gray sky. The kind of soul rain that doesn't commit. Just hangs in the air like it's deciding whether to fall. Afua had finished plating lunch. She was supposed to start the dinner prep. She was supposed to stay behind the kitchen line where she was invisible and employed and safe. But she looked through the pass-through window and saw the girl. Same table, same wall, same hum. And Afua was 9 years old again, sitting in the corner of the Kumasi Methodist Primary School cafeteria 3 weeks after her father's funeral. Eating fufu alone because grief had made her invisible, and nobody knew how to sit with the girl whose father just died. Nobody came, not one person, not one teacher, not one child. She ate alone for 4 months until she stopped eating at school altogether. Nobody sat down for her. So Afua grabbed a tray, put her own lunch on it, leftover jollof rice she'd made for herself that morning, chin-chin she'd fried at 3 a.m. because the smell reminded her of home. She walked out from behind the kitchen line, across the cafeteria floor, past 300 children and 6 cameras and 1 very firm warning, and she sat down at table 9, across from the girl. The girl didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her, didn't stop humming. Afua didn't speak. She just sat. She opened her own food and ate. 2 strangers at a table by the wall, one of them old enough to know better, and one of them too young to know she'd been waiting. They sat in silence for 12 minutes. Then Afua placed a single piece of chin-chin on the edge of the girl's tray, golden brown, still warm, dusted with sugar and nutmeg the way her mother made it. The girl stopped humming. She looked at the chin-chin. She looked at Afua, her eyes, dark brown, wide, old in a way that no 7-year-old's eyes should be, held Afua's gaze for 3 full seconds. She didn't touch it. Afua didn't push. She finished her lunch, picked up her tray, and went back to the kitchen. Madame Go glared at her from behind the soup station. Afua didn't explain. There was nothing to explain. She sat down. That's all. She sat down because somebody should have, a long time ago, and nobody did. The next day, the chin-chin was gone from the tray. Soman had eaten it after Afua left. Day 16, Ifua put another piece on the tray. Day 17, Soman ate it while Ifua was still sitting there. Day 18, Soman slid her tray 2 inches closer. Day 19, Soman spoke her first word, not in Korean, in English. More. And that single word, 1 syllable, barely above a whisper, from a child who had been silent for 11 months, cracked something open that would eventually bring down an empire, expose a murder, and force the most powerful man in Seoul to choose between his vengeance and his daughter's life. But we'll get there. Trust me, we will absolutely get there. Now, here's the thing about Afua Mensah that you need to understand before we go any further. This woman does not do things halfway. Never has. When she cooks with her whole body. When she prays until her knees ache. When she loves like it's an act of war. And when she decides to sit down at a table where she has no business sitting, she doesn't do it because she thought it through. She does it because something in her chest told her to move, and she moved. That's how her mother raised her. Auntie Amma, who ran a Kelawela stand at the Kumasi Central Market for 23 years and never once let a child walk past without putting something warm in their hand. Afua, she used to say, grinding ginger into batter at 4 a.m. while the roosters were still arguing about whether it was dawn yet. The world will teach you to look away. Your job is to refuse. Ifua refused a lot of things. She refused to stay in Kumasi after the money ran out. She refused to take the factory job in Tama that paid twice what a kitchen job paid but would have buried her alive. She refused to believe that a woman whose hands could make dough rise and soup sing and rice behave had no place in this world. So she came to Seoul, applied to 9 jobs, got rejected from 8. The 9th was a cafeteria cook position at Daesung International Academy in Incheon, and they hired her because she was the only applicant willing to start at 4 a.m. for the kind of pay that would embarrass a street vendor. She didn't care. She was here to work and send money home. Everything else was noise. But Afua could not stop noticing the girl. Day 1, she clocked it from behind the kitchen pass-through window. 300 kids in that cafeteria, and every single table was chaos. Beautiful chaos. The sound of a world that was working. But table 9 was a pocket of silence so complete it felt like a hole in the room. A 7-year-old girl sat alone, back to the wall. Not facing the window, not facing the door. Facing nothing. She ate with one hand. The other hand gripped the handle of a blue insulated lunchbox pressed against her left hip. She held that lunchbox the way a soldier holds a sidearm, close, ready, like she might need it. She was small, too thin, the kind of thin that isn't about food, but about a body that has decided to take up less space in the world because the world has given it reasons to shrink. Her school uniform was slightly too big. Her socks kept sliding down, and she hummed. The same melody. Every single day. Afua asked Mrs. Cheon, the kitchen ajumma who'd been there 11 years and had opinions about oxygen. That's the Beck child. Don't what? Don't anything. Her father built this school. He watches the cameras. Every black dot on that ceiling is a camera, and every camera feeds to his office. You go near her, you're gone. Afua nodded. She understood powerful men. She grew up in Kumasi, where the chief's compound had walls with ears and nobody whispered louder than the wind. She understood that power protects by isolating, that the safest child is the loneliest child. She also understood that understanding something and accepting it are 2 completely different things. Day 3, Day 5, Day 8, Day 12. Same table, same wall, same hum, same grip on that lunchbox like it was the only friend she had left in the world. No child approached. No teacher checked. 300 children in that cafeteria, and a 7-year-old was eating lunch in solitary confinement, and the entire school had collectively agreed to pretend that was normal. Day 15, Thursday. The kind of soul rain that doesn't commit, just hangs in the air like it's deciding whether to fall or go home. Afua was supposed to start the dinner prep. She was supposed to stay behind the line where she was invisible and employed and safe, but she looked through the pass-through window and she was 9 years old again, sitting in the corner of the Kumasi Methodist Primary School cafeteria 3 weeks after they buried her father in the red clay behind the church. Eating fufu alone because grief had made her invisible, and nobody in the world knew how to sit with the girl whose father stopped breathing in a maize field on a Tuesday. 4 months she ate alone. 4 months nobody came. Not one teacher, not one child. 4 months of learning that invisible is permanent if you let it be. Nobody sat down for her, so she grabbed a tray, put her own lunch on it, leftover jollof rice, chin-chin she'd fried at 3 a.m. because the smell of nutmeg and groundnut oil in a dark kitchen is the closest thing to home when home is 6,000 miles away. She walked out from behind the kitchen line, across the cafeteria floor, past 300 children and 6 cameras and one very clear warning, and she sat down at table 9. Soman didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her, didn't stop humming. Afua didn't speak. She ate. 12 minutes of silence. 2 strangers at a table by the wall, one of them old enough to know this was a terrible idea, and one of them too young to know she'd been waiting for it. Then Afua placed a single piece of chin-chin on the edge of Soman's tray. Golden brown, still warm. Dusted with sugar and nutmeg, the dough rolled cold before frying so it would puff right, exactly the way Auntie Amma made it. Her mother always said the secret is patience. You rush the dough, the chin-chin lies flat. You let it rest, it rises. Everything good takes time. Soman stopped humming. She looked at the chin-chin. She looked at Afua. Dark brown eyes, wide and old in a way no 7-year-old's eyes should be. She held Afua's gaze for 3 full seconds. She didn't touch it. Afua didn't push. She finished her lunch, picked up her tray, went back to the kitchen. Madame Go glared at her from behind the soup station like she'd just committed arson. Afua didn't explain. There was nothing to explain. Day 16. The chin-chin was gone. Soman had eaten it after Afua left. Afua put another piece on the tray. Day 17. Soman ate it while Afua was still sitting there. Her hand moved slowly, like she was diffusing something. She put the chin-chin in her mouth and chewed with her eyes closed, and Afua saw her shoulders drop 1/4 of an inch, and that 1/4 of an inch was everything. Day 18. Soman slid her tray 2 inches closer to Afua's. 2 inches. In the language of a child who has been alone for 11 months, 2 inches is an ocean crossing. Day 19. Afua said the word out loud. Chin-chin. Pointed at the piece on the tray. Soman looked at it, looked at Afua, and repeated it. Chin-chin. Her first voluntary word in Afua's presence. Not Korean, not English. A Ghanaian word. And the way she said it, careful and quiet and precise, sounded like a door opening 1 centimeter at a time. Day 20. Soman finished eating. She stood up. She picked up her tray, and then she stopped. She turned back. She reached into her own lunchbox and pulled out a piece of chin-chin that Afua had given her the day before. She'd saved it. Overnight. She placed it on Afua's tray. Reciprocation. In Akan culture, when you return food to the person who fed you, it means something specific. It means I receive you. It means you are no longer a stranger at my table. It means we belong to each other now. Afua's mother would have recognized it instantly. Afua's hands were shaking. Then Somin leaned close, so close that her lips were almost touching Afua's ear, and she whispered, not in Korean, in English. Don't tell anyone you sat here. She pulled back. Her face was perfectly composed, perfectly still, the face of a child who has practiced hiding. Then she picked up her lunchbox, held it tight against her hip, and walked away. Afua sat at that empty table with a piece of day-old chin-chin on her tray and 3 questions burning through her chest like coals. Why English? A 7-year-old in a Korean school, speaking to a Ghanaian woman she's known for 5 days, and she switches to English. Someone taught her that phrase. Someone taught her that Korean might be overheard by the wrong ears, but English was a safe language, a hiding language. Who taught her to hide, and who exactly is she hiding from? Baek Jung-yeon had not always been a man who watched life through screens. There was a time, and it feels like a different century now, though it was only 11 months ago, when he walked through the world with his hands open. when he drove Somin to school himself and waited in the parking lot until she waved from the second-floor window because she made him promise he wouldn't leave until she could see him. When he sat on the kitchen floor at midnight eating ramyeon with Yuna, while she read him passages from whatever corruption story she was investigating that week, and he'd say, "You're going to get yourself killed," and she'd say, "Then you'll have to protect me better." And they'd both laugh because they thought they were joking. They weren't joking. Yuna was killed in the school parking lot on a Wednesday in March, shot 3 times. Nobody saw it, nobody heard it. The security cameras in the parking lot, 6 of them, had all malfunctioned simultaneously at 2:47 p.m., and by the time they came back online at 2:54 p.m., Yuna was on the asphalt and her phone was gone and the parking lot was empty except for her car and her blood. The police investigated. Junghyun's head of security, Shin Dongchul, cooperated fully. Dongchul's team provided access to all internal security footage. Dongchul personally liaised with the detectives. Dongchul supervised the evidence collection from Yuna's car. Dongchul reported that Yuna's phone had been lost in the chaos of the crime scene, probably taken by the killer. Dongchul was thorough. Dongchul was helpful. Dongchul was everywhere. The case went cold in 6 weeks. And Junghyun retreated behind glass. He installed cameras, 11 feeds covering every inch of Somin's school, the cafeteria, the hallways, the playground, the parking lot. New cameras, better cameras, cameras that didn't malfunction. He watched from his office at the Gyumsun Group headquarters in Gangnam, and he told himself this was protection. This was love translated into surveillance. This was a father keeping his daughter safe. It was not. It was a man who couldn't look at his daughter's face without seeing his dead wife's eyes staring back at him, and a screen is easier to look at than a mirror. He watched Somin eat lunch alone every day for 11 months, and he did nothing. Let that sink in. He saw the same thing Afua saw, the solitary table, the wall, the hum, the grip on the lunchbox, and he did nothing. Because doing something meant going there. Going there meant standing in the parking lot where Yuna's blood had stained the concrete. Standing in the parking lot meant feeling, and feeling meant coming apart. And Baek Junghyun could not afford to come apart because if he came apart, the Gumsun syndicate would eat itself alive and Somin would have neither parent. So he watched. And he told himself watching was enough. On day 15, when Efua walked across the cafeteria and sat down at table 9, Junghyun's hand moved to the phone so fast he knocked over his coffee. Black liquid spread across his desk like a stain he didn't notice because his eyes were locked on camera 4. Who is that? He called Dongchul. 1 ring. Dongchul picked up before the second. The new cafeteria hire, Ghanaian, temporary visa, placed through the Hanbit staffing agency 3 weeks ago. Dongchul's voice was flat, efficient, rehearsed. Junghyun's eyes stayed on the screen. 3 weeks ago. And you didn't flag a new hire near my daughter? She's kitchen staff. She has no contact with students during school hours. This appears to be a lunch break aberration. I can have her reassigned by tomorrow. But Junghyun wasn't listening anymore, because on the screen something was happening that he hadn't seen in 11 months. Somin tilted her head. The way Yuna used to tilt her head when someone said something that surprised her, and then Somin's shoulders dropped. And then she made a sound that the microphone barely caught, a sound so small it was almost nothing. But Junghyun heard it because he'd been listening for it every day for 334 days. His daughter laughed, not the mechanical sound she made when Unseo asked her if she'd had a good day at school, not the performance she'd learned to produce so that adults would stop asking if she was okay. This was the real sound. The belly sound, the sound that curled her whole body forward and made her look exactly like her mother for 1 devastating second. Junghyun's hand came off the phone, he set it down on the desk, he sat back in his chair, and he watched. 22 minutes. He watched a stranger in a flour-dusted apron sit with his daughter and not say a word and somehow, impossibly, make her sound alive again. Then he noticed something else, Somin's body positioning. He'd been watching her on these cameras for 11 months, and he'd never consciously registered what he was seeing. But now, with Afua there as contrast, it hit him. Somin always sat with her back to camera 4. Her lunchbox was always on her left side, the side the camera couldn't see. She angled her body so that the lunchbox was in a permanent blind spot. She wasn't just eating alone. She was hiding something. From the cameras. from him. A 7-year-old was running counter-surveillance on her own father's security system. Jung-hyun stared at the screen. "Why is she hiding from me?" he said aloud, to no one. His phone buzzed. Dong-chul again. "Sir, regarding the cook, want me to have her removed?" Jung-hyun watched Somin's face on the screen. The almost smile, the shoulders that had dropped 1/4 of an inch, the lunchbox grip that had loosened, just slightly, for the first time in 11 months. "She made Somin laugh," Jung-hyun said. "Leave her." He hung up. Now before I tell you who Dong-chul calls next, and why that call is about to change absolutely everything, I need you to do me the tiniest favor. Hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, because this story is reaching corners of the planet I didn't even know existed. And if you haven't subscribed, besties, you are going to want to be here for what comes next. Because what Dong-chul does in the next 60 seconds will prove that the man Jung-hyun trusts with his daughter's safety is the same man who made sure his wife never came home alive. On the other end of the line, Shin Dong-chul set his phone down on his desk with the care of a man placing a pin back in a grenade. He sat still for 10 seconds. Then he picked up a second phone. Not the company phone. Not the encrypted line Jung-hyun knew about. A third device, prepaid, purchased at a convenience store in Suwon 4 months ago, and replaced every 60 days. He dialed a number, 1 ring, 2 rings. A woman's voice answered, careful, controlled, the voice of someone who has been waiting for this call and hoping it would never come. Dong-chul said 2 words, "We have a problem." On the other end of the line, in a house that smelled like jasmine and white gardenia perfume, Baek Yoon-seo, Yuna's younger sister, Somin's devoted aunt, the woman the entire Baek household considered a saint, closed her eyes and gripped the gold locket around her neck so hard the chain bit into her skin. Let me slow down here. I need to. Because what comes next is heavy, and before we get to the heavy, you need to understand what Efua and Somin built in the quiet spaces between the storms. You need to feel it. Because if you don't fall in love with this bond right now, the rest of the story won't hit the way it needs to hit. So let me take you into the kitchen. 3:15 p.m. The cafeteria was empty. The last student had left an hour ago. The industrial lights hummed the way they do in big, empty rooms, and the kitchen smelled like doenjang and bleach and the ghost of 400 lunches. Afua was supposed to be scrubbing the rice cookers. Instead, she was standing at the prep counter with a bag of flour, a bowl of groundnut oil, and a 7-year-old girl whose hands were covered to the wrists in dough. "Like this," Afua said, pressing the dough flat with her palm, then folding it, pressing again. "You have to feel it. When it stops sticking to your fingers, it's ready. My mother says the dough will tell you when it's done if you listen." Somin pressed, folded, pressed again. Her small hands worked with a focus that was almost frightening. 7 years old, and she concentrated on that dough like she was assembling something that would save her life. Maybe she was. "You're Iyama," Somin said quietly. "She taught you this?" "Everything I know about food. She taught me that feeding someone is how you say, 'I see you.' In my language, in Twai, we say meda ase when someone gives us food. It means thank you. But really, it means something deeper. It means I acknowledge what you gave me." "Medase," Somin repeated, carefully, like she was storing it somewhere safe. "Perfect. Now you teach me something." Somin was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mashisoyo." "What does that mean?" "Delicious. When Iyama cooked, she always made me taste first, and I always said mashisoyo even before I tasted it. Because it was always good. Always." Efua smiled. "Mashisoyo," she repeated, and her pronunciation was terrible, and Somin almost laughed, and that almost laugh was worth more than gold. They cut the dough into small rectangles. Efua heated the groundnut oil in a deep pan, testing the temperature the way her mother taught her, dropping in a tiny piece and watching it sink, then rise. If it rises in 3 seconds, the oil is ready. If it sits at the bottom, you wait. "You never rush hot oil," Efua said. "Hot oil and impatience will burn down your whole kitchen. My mother burned down our kitchen once. She tells everyone it was a candle." Somin looked at her. "Was it?" "It was absolutely the groundnut oil, but we don't tell Auntie Amma I told you that." Somin's mouth twitched. the closest thing to a smile Afua had seen that didn't involve chin-chin. They fried the pieces together. Afua dropped them in. Somin watched them puff and turn golden, her eyes wide. "They're growing," she whispered. "That's because we let the dough rest. Everything good needs rest before it can rise." When the chin-chin was done, golden and warm and dusted with sugar and nutmeg, Somin ate 3 pieces in a row and then did something unexpected. She walked to the school kitchen's cold storage, opened the door like she owned the place, and came back carrying a container of doenjang paste, a block of firm tofu, and a handful of green onions. "What are you doing?" Afua asked. "Teaching you." And for the next 30 minutes, a 7-year-old girl dictated her dead mother's doenjang jjigae recipe from memory, every ingredient, every step, every measurement, down to the exact number of seconds you stir the anchovy broth before adding the paste. Iyama said 60 seconds, not 55, not 65, 60. Afua followed her instructions, and Somin corrected her the way a tiny, very serious chef corrects a much taller apprentice. "More gochugaru," Iyama always said a little more. And then, quietly, "She said the secret is you have to be angry at the pot, not sad. Angry. Because angry food has flavor and sad food just tastes like water." Afua stirred the pot and thought about her own mother standing over the kelawel pan in Kumasi at 4 a.m., slapping plantain slices into hot oil with the kind of aggression that suggested the plantains had personally offended her. Maybe all mothers cook angry. Maybe that's why the food always tastes like love. When the jjigae was done, they ate it together, standing at the prep counter because there were no chairs, sharing one spoon because Somin wouldn't use a separate one. "Mashisoyo?" Afua asked. Somin tasted it. Her eyes closed, and when she opened them, they were wet. "It's wrong," she whispered. "It's close, but it's wrong. Iyama's tasted different." "How?" "I don't know. I remember everything she did, every step, every ingredient, but it tastes different when I make it. I think it tasted different because she was the one stirring." She looked down at the spoon. "I think food knows who's cooking it." Afua put her hand on Somin's head, gently, the way you touch something precious and breakable, and Somin didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She leaned in, just slightly, just enough. The first time in 11 months she'd leaned toward a human being instead of away from one. Behind them, the kitchen door opened. Madame Go stood there, apron off, coat on, ready to leave. She looked at the mess, the flour on the counter, the pot on the burner, the Ghanaian woman and the Korean child standing shoulder to hip sharing a spoon. Go didn't say a word. She stepped back out, closed the door, and for the next 20 minutes, she stood outside that kitchen like a palace guard, arms crossed, face set, redirecting the janitor and the after-school supervisor and anyone else who came within 10 meters. She didn't explain why. She didn't need to. Some things you protect without being asked. When Afua and Somin finally cleaned up and Somin was packing her lunchbox, something changed. Somin started humming. Not the usual melody, something different. A Korean hymn, but in an arrangement Afua had never heard, with notes that climbed and fell in a pattern that sounded like grief being braided into music. It was beautiful. It was devastating. It was the kind of melody that makes you stop what you're doing and listen with your whole body. Behind them, the kitchen door swung open. Go had come back in for her keys. She was halfway to the hook by the fridge when the melody hit her. The metal tray she was carrying slid out of her hands and hit the tile floor with a crash that echoed through the empty cafeteria like a gunshot. Somin stopped humming. Afua spun around. Go was standing perfectly still, the blood draining from her face in real time, her hands suspended in the air where the tray had been. Where did she learn that? Go's voice was barely a whisper. She wasn't looking at Afua. She was looking at Somin with an expression that was equal parts terror and recognition. Learn what? The song? Go's hands were trembling. That's not just a song. That's the arrangement they performed at her mother's funeral. A custom arrangement. The choir director composed it specifically for the service. It was performed once, one time, in a church in Gangnam, 11 months ago. She looked at Somin, who had gone very still, Lunchbox gripped tight against her body. Somin was in the hospital that day. Pneumonia. She wasn't at the funeral. She didn't hear it. She couldn't have heard it. The kitchen was silent, except for the hum of the industrial refrigerator. Somin looked at Go. Then she looked at Afua, and her hand moved to the lunchbox, not to the handle, to the lunchbox itself. She pressed it tighter against her body, and Afua realized, with a chill that started at the base of her skull and crawled down her spine, that whatever was in that lunchbox was not a child's lunch. Afua didn't sleep that night. She lay on her mattress in Bupyeong and stared at the ceiling and listened to the rain hit the window and replayed the moment Go's tray crashed against the floor over and over until the sound became a heartbeat. Where did she learn that? She wasn't there. She couldn't have heard it. But Somin knew the melody. Every note, every rise and fall. She knew it so well she hummed it without thinking, the way you hum a song you've heard 1,000 times. Not once. 1,000 times. And the only way a 7-year-old learns a song she never heard performed is if someone gave it to her. The next afternoon, Ifua sat at table 9. Somin was already there, lunchbox in position, back to the camera, same as always. But something was different. Somin was watching Ifua's face with an intensity that made the air feel heavier, measuring, deciding. Ifua didn't push. She ate her rice. She put a piece of chin-chin on Somin's tray. She waited, because her mother always said patience is a conversation. You sit with someone long enough, and the silence does the talking. 14 minutes passed. Then Somin spoke. You want to know about the song? It wasn't a question. Only if you want to tell me. Somin looked down at her lunchbox. She ran her thumb along the edge, back and forth, back and forth. A rhythm, like she was counting something only she could hear. I can show you, she said, but you have to promise. Promise what? That you won't tell anyone. Not the kitchen ajuma, not the teachers, not anyone. Afua hesitated. Promising a child to keep a secret is a complicated thing. It's the kind of promise that can protect or the kind that can trap, and you don't always know which one until it's too late. But Somin's eyes were so steady and so old and so tired that Afua understood this wasn't a child's game. This was a child asking for something she'd been carrying alone for a very long time. I promise. Somin checked behind her, glanced at the ceiling, located the camera. Then she shifted her body, angling it so the lunchbox was in the blind spot she'd been maintaining for 11 months. She unzipped the insulated case, lifted out the top compartment, the one that held a half-eaten kimbap roll, and beneath it, fitted into a false bottom she'd constructed from flattened cardboard and packing tape with the crude precision of a child engineer, was a phone. Samsung. Old model. Cracked screen. A vertical fracture running from the top left corner to the bottom right, splitting the display like a lightning bolt frozen in glass. The phone was off. Somin pressed the power button and the screen flickered to life, dim and fractured, and Afua saw the battery was at 11%. It was always at 11%, she'd learn later, because Somin only turned it on to listen, and she turned it off immediately after, rationing the charge the way a lost hiker rations water, because there is no charger in the world that a 7-year-old can access without an adult asking questions. Somin navigated to the voicemail. One saved message. She pressed play, and a dead woman's voice filled the space between them. It came through the cracked speaker, thin and distorted, a woman speaking rapid Korean, breathless, the words tumbling out so fast they piled on top of each other like someone running downhill. Afua's Korean was survival level at best. She caught fragments. Somin Ah. The child's name, soft even in panic. Juchajang. Parking lot. A word that sounded like a name, but Afua couldn't be sure. Then more words, faster, higher, a woman who knew she was running out of time and was trying to pour an entire life's worth of information into 30 seconds of recording. Then the voice changed, the frantic words stopped, and the woman started singing. The hymn, the same arrangement. Nazing Gyurais. Amazing Grace, but in Korean, in a version that climbed where the original descends and broke where the original resolves, a custom arrangement that a choir director in Gangnam composed for one funeral and performed one time, and Yuna was singing it into her daughter's voicemail because she knew she was about to die, and she wanted Somin to have her voice one last time. The voicemail was 43 seconds long. The singing lasted 19 of them. And then, right before the recording cut off, one more word, a whisper. Saranghae, I love you. The message ended. Silence. The cafeteria hummed around them, 300 children at their tables, and Afua and Somin existed in a pocket of devastation so complete that the noise felt like it was coming from another planet. How many times have you listened to that? Afua's voice was barely functioning. Somin unzipped the lunchbox fully and tilted the lid toward Afua. The inside of the lid was covered, every millimeter. Tiny lines scratched in blue ballpoint pen, organized in groups of 5, the way you count in prison. Tallies, hundreds and hundreds of tallies, so dense they overlapped, so numerous they'd worn grooves into the cardboard. 847, Somin said. 847 times a 7-year-old girl had pressed play on her dead mother's voicemail in the dark, in her bed, under the covers, with the volume so low she had to press the cracked speaker directly against her ear. 847 times she'd heard her mother's voice break from words into song. 847 times she'd heard saranghae and known it was the last time her mother ever said it. And she'd counted every single time, because Beck Somin does not approximate, she does not guess, she quantifies. When the world is chaos and the adults are lying and the only person who ever made her feel safe is dead, numbers are the one thing that don't lie. Numbers don't betray you, numbers don't change their story. 847 is a fact, and facts are all she has left. Afua was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles ached. She needed to be steady. She needed to be the adult this child needed her to be. But the inside of her chest felt like someone had taken a hot coal and pressed it against her rib cage. Somin, the words before the singing. Do you know what your Iyama was saying? Somin nodded. Once. Precise. She was saying who was following her. She was saying why. She was saying names. What names? Somin looked at Afua. And for the first time, the practiced blankness on her face cracked, just at the edges, just enough for Afua to see what was underneath. Terror. The chronic, bone-deep, 11-month-old terror of a child who has been carrying something too heavy for an adult, let alone a 7-year-old, and she has been carrying it alone because the one person who should be protecting her has been watching from behind a screen instead of sitting down. Imo told me, Somin said quietly, if I tell anyone what Iyama said on the phone, the same thing that happened to Iyama will happen to Appa. Imo, aunt. Afua's whole body went cold. Imo told me the day after Iyama died. She said the men who hurt Iyama are watching. She said they can hear everything. She said if I show anyone the phone or say any of the names, Appa will die in the parking lot the same way Iyama did. She said the only way to keep Appa safe is to never talk, to never show anyone, to keep it hidden. She pressed the phone against her chest, both hands wrapped around it like a prayer. I've been keeping Appa safe for 334 days. 334 days. She knew the exact number. Of course she did. This child counted everything because counting was the only power she had. 334 days of silence. 334 days of eating alone at table 9 so no one would sit close enough to hear the voicemail, to see the phone, to ask the wrong question. 334 days of performing obedience for her aunt, holding her hand at pickup, saying, yes, Imo, and thank you, Imo, and swallowing the scream that lived permanently in the back of her throat. She was not eating alone because she was sad. She was eating alone because she was on a mission. She was protecting her father the only way she knew how, by disappearing. Somin, Afua said, and her voice was trembling and she didn't try to hide it. Does your Appa know about this phone? Somin looked at her. Flat, steady, the eyes of a courtroom witness, not a child. Imo said if I tell Appa, he'll die the same way Iyama did. And Afua understood then, sitting at table 9 in a cafeteria that smelled like rice and bleach and groundnut oil, that she was not holding a child's secret. She was holding a dead woman's testimony. A dying mother had called her daughter's voicemail and named the people who were about to kill her, and her 7-year-old daughter had memorized every word and buried the phone in a lunchbox and carried it to school every day for 11 months, eating alone, humming her mother's last song, marking tallies on the lid like a prisoner counting the days until someone, anyone, would finally sit down and listen. And Afua had sat down. And now she had to decide what to do with what she'd heard. Because the voicemail was in Korean, rapid, panicked Korean. Afua had caught fragments, a word that sounded like juchajang, parking lot, and a name that sounded like it started with go or go, a short, hard syllable. Go. Afua's eyes moved to the kitchen pass-through window. Through it, she could see the back of Madame Go's head, the head chef, the woman who had locked the kitchen door for them, the woman who had stood guard while they cooked, the woman who dropped a tray when she heard the funeral hymn, the woman who knew what arrangement was played at Yuna's funeral because she was there, because she knew Yuna, because she knew Yuna. Afua looked at Somin, looked at the phone, looked at the pass-through window, and a thought moved through her so cold and so terrible that she almost stood up from the table. What if the woman who's been helping me is the woman Yuna was naming? What if Madame Go didn't lock that kitchen door to protect us? What if she locked it to watch us? Afua could not look at Madame Go the same way after that afternoon. Every morning she walked into the kitchen at 4 a.m. and there was Go, already at the burners, already stirring something, already occupying the space like she'd been there all night. And now every one of those mornings replayed in Afua's head like evidence. Go was always first in, always last out, always positioned at the pass-through window where she could see the cafeteria, always watching. Afua had thought it was dedication. Now she thought it might be surveillance. The name on the voicemail. The fragment she'd caught through the cracked speaker, through the distortion, through the rapid Korean she barely understood. It sounded like go, a short, hard syllable. And Madame Go had known the funeral hymn arrangement. She'd known it was custom. She'd known it was performed once, in a specific church, on a specific day. She'd known Somin wasn't at the funeral. How do you know that much about a dead woman's funeral unless you were there? Unless you were close? Unless you were involved? Afua started cataloging. Small things. Things she'd ignored before because she'd had no reason to look. Go always positioned herself at the station nearest the pass-through window. Go always took the afternoon shift, the one that overlapped with Somin's lunch period. Go had locked the kitchen door when she found Afua and Somin cooking together. She said she was standing guard. But standing guard and standing watch are two very different things, and the difference is which direction you're facing. Wednesday afternoon, Afua was scrubbing the prep counter when a car pulled into the school's front circle. Silver. Expensive. The kind of car that whispers money instead of shouting it. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. Afua had never seen Baek Yunseo before, but she recognized her instantly. Not the face, the performance, the way she moved across the schoolyard with the specific, practiced grace of a woman who knows she's being watched and has calibrated every step accordingly. The smile she gave the security guard, the wave to a teacher crossing the courtyard, the way she adjusted her cream-colored coat, the collar of her silk blouse, the fall of her dark brown hair. Every gesture was warm. Every gesture was precise. Every gesture was a note in a melody designed to make you feel safe. Afua knew that melody. Her stepmother in Kumasi smiled like that. Beautiful and practiced and hollow at the center, like a gourd that looks full until you pick it up. That's the aunt, Mrs. Cheon said from behind the rice cooker. Yuna's sister. She moved into the house after the funeral, takes care of Somin now, nicest woman in the world, brings us kimbap every Friday. Afua watched through the window as Somin came out of the school building. The shift was immediate. Whatever softness Somin carried in the cafeteria with Afua vanished. Her spine straightened, her chin dropped, her arms pressed tight against her sides, lunchbox gripped to her left hip. She walked toward Yunseo the way a soldier walks toward inspection, correct, controlled, braced. Yunseo knelt down, opened her arms. "My little star," she said, loud enough for the teachers to hear. "How was your day?" Somin allowed herself to be hugged. Allowed. That was the word. She didn't lean in. She didn't wrap her arms around Yunseo's neck. She stood inside the embrace like a post inside a fence and waited for it to end. Afua moved. She shouldn't have. She knew she shouldn't have. But her legs carried her out of the kitchen, through the service entrance, and around the side of the building to the parking lot. She stayed behind the concrete pillar near the dumpsters, close enough to see, not close enough to hear. Yunseo was walking Somin to the car. Her hand was on Somin's shoulder. She leaned down and said something. close to Somin's ear. A whisper. Afua couldn't hear the words, but she could see Somin's hand, the one gripping the lunchbox. The knuckles went white, not gradually, instantly, like someone had flipped a switch inside her body from endure to brace. Then Unseo straightened, smoothed Somin's hair, tucked a strand behind her ear the way a loving aunt would, opened the car door. Somin climbed in. Yonseo closed the door, turned, and smiled at a passing teacher who waved. "See you Friday, Mrs. Park. I'll bring the kimbap." The teacher waved back. Yunseo got in the car. The silver car pulled away, and Ifua stood behind the dumpster with her heart hammering against her ribs and two truths fighting for space in her head. The first truth, something was wrong between Somin and her aunt. The second truth, Ifua was watching the wrong woman. She was still focused on Go, still building a case against the head chef in her mind, still turning over the name she'd heard on the voicemail, the short, hard syllable that sounded like Go. But the parking lot scene was lodged in her chest like a fishbone. The white knuckles, the rigid body, the whisper. Whatever Yunseo said to Somin in that parking lot made a 7-year-old girl grip her lunchbox like it was a life raft. But Afua didn't connect it. Not yet. She was looking in the wrong direction and she didn't know it. And besties, I know what you're thinking right now. I know you want to reach through the screen and shake her, but trust me, what Afua thinks she knows and what's actually happening are two completely different things. And the truth? It is so much worse than anything she's imagined. Stick with me. Hit that like button if your heart is already in your throat, because mine has been there for the last 3 chapters, and it is not coming down. That night, in her one-room apartment in Bupyeong, Afua sat cross-legged on her mattress with Somin's phone. Somin had given it to her that afternoon. Not permanently, just for the night. "Bring it back tomorrow," she'd said, with the seriousness of a banker handing over a vault key. "Don't let anyone see it. And don't play it out loud. Use this." She'd given Afua a single earbud. Pink, the left one. The right one was broken. Afua plugged in the earbud, pressed play, listened. The voicemail filled her ear, Yuna's voice. Fast, breathless, the words crashing into each other. Afua listened 3 times and understood almost nothing. Her Korean was built for kitchens and grocery stores, not for a dying woman's final testimony. She downloaded a translation app, Naver Papago. She played the voicemail into the app's microphone, holding it close to the phone's cracked speaker. The app struggled. The audio quality was terrible. The speed was too fast. Half the words came back as question marks or fragments, but on the 4th try, the app caught something. A phrase, clear enough for the algorithm to process. 7 syllables in Korean that the app translated into English with mechanical indifference. "Yunseo uni." She brought them to me. Afua stared at the screen. Not Go. Yunseo. Uni. Older sister. Yuna calling her own older sister by the intimate term. And then, "She brought them to me." Brought who? Brought them where? Brought them to the parking lot? Afua's hands were shaking so hard the phone nearly fell. She played it again, again, again. The app caught the same phrase every time. "Yunseo uni." She brought them to me. The woman who picks Somin up from school every day. The woman who smooths her hair and calls her "my little star." The woman who brings kimbap for the teachers and smiles at the security guard, and lives in the same house as the child who has been carrying a dead woman's phone for 11 months. Afua had spent 3 days watching Madame Go, building a case in her head, constructing a theory from fear and fragments and a name she misheard through a cracked speaker. She'd been watching the wrong woman. The real threat wasn't in the kitchen. The real threat was in the car, every afternoon, smiling, buckling Somin's seatbelt, driving her home to a house where the aunt who helped kill her mother tucks her into bed every single night. And Somin knows. Somin has always known. That's why she grips the lunchbox. That's why she goes rigid. That's why she whispered to Afua in English, not Korean. Because Korean is the language her aunt understands and English is the language of hiding. Afua put the phone down, put her head in her hands, and understood for the first time the full scope of what she had sat down into. This was not a sad child eating lunch alone. This was a crime scene, and she was standing in the middle of it with no Korean, no power, no connections, and a temporary work visa that could be revoked with a single phone call. Afua was in the kitchen at 3 a.m., not to cook, to wait. Go arrived at 3:45, the way she always did, keys jangling, her breath visible in the November cold. She pushed through the kitchen door, flipped the lights, and found Afua sitting on an overturned milk crate next to the dry storage shelves, arms crossed, face set, the phone in her lap. Go stopped, looked at the phone, looked at Afua, and something moved across her face, not surprise but recognition, the look of a woman who has been waiting for a conversation she hoped would never come. "I heard the voicemail," Afua said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "I know what's on it. I had a translation app process it, and I heard a name." She watched Go's face, watched for the flinch, the tell, the crack. "I heard your name." Go set her bag down on the counter, slowly, took off her coat, hung it on the hook by the door. Every movement deliberate, unhurried. The movements of a woman who has rehearsed this moment in her mind enough times to know that rushing would look like guilt. "You heard wrong," Go said. You heard wrong, play it again." Afua pressed play. The voicemail filled the kitchen through the cracked speaker. Yuna's voice, the frantic Korean, the names, the singing, the final saranghae. When it finished, Go stood very still for a long moment. Her eyes were closed. Her hands were flat on the prep counter. Afua could see her fingertips pressing into the stainless steel hard enough to leave marks. "That name," Go said, opening her eyes. "The one you think is mine. Play it again. Just that part." Afua rewound, played the fragment, the syllable she'd been hearing as go. "That's not go," Go said quietly. "That's yunseo." She's saying yunseo uni. Listen to the vowel. It's iu, not go. Your ear is hearing the consonant wrong because Korean consonants shift depending on position. You've been hearing my name for 3 days. What you're actually hearing is the name of the woman who picks that child up from school every afternoon and drives her home and tucks her into bed. Afua stared at her. "You're telling me you're not involved." "I'm telling you I'm the reason you got hired." The kitchen went very quiet. The industrial refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a truck rumbled past on the service road. "Yuna was my friend," Go said. "Not a colleague, not an acquaintance. My friend. We grew up together in Mokpo. Same fishing village, same school, same church where we sang hymns on Sunday and stole persimmons from Mr. Bay's tree on Monday. I knew Yuna before she was a journalist, before she married Jung-yeon, before any of this. She was Choi Yuna from the house at the end of the dock, and she was my best friend for 34 years. Go's voice didn't break. It stayed level, controlled, the voice of a woman who has cried about this alone so many times that the tears have calcified into something harder. The week before she died, she called me. 3 a.m. She said, "Misiona, I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Port records, shipping manifests, money moving through Jung-hyun's company that Jung-hyun doesn't know about. Dong-chul's been skimming from the syndicate's port operations for 3 years. Millions. And I have the documents." I told her to stop. I told her to leave it alone. She said, "If something happens to me, watch Somin." I said, "Nothing's going to happen." She said, "Promise me." So I promised. Go looked at the phone in Afua's hand. Something happened 1 week later, parking lot, 3 shots, and I broke every promise I've ever made except that one. I applied for the cafeteria job 2 weeks after the funeral. I've been watching Somin from the other side of this kitchen for 11 months. Afua sat with this. 2 women, same child, one watching from the cafeteria, one watching from the kitchen. 11 months, neither one knowing the other existed as an ally. 2 parallel vigils running side by side like train tracks that never touch. "Why didn't you go to Jung-hyun?" Afua asked. Go's expression hardened. "Because everything that reaches Jung-hyun goes through Dong-chul. Every message, every meeting request, every piece of information. Dong-chul is the gatekeeper. 6 months ago, there was a driver, Moon Jae-sik. He worked for the family. He found something, I don't know what, records maybe, something from Yuna's investigation. He tried to reach Junghyun directly. He went through Dongchul's security channels to request a private meeting. She paused. His car was found at Incheon Airport 3 days later. He wasn't on any flight. He hasn't been seen since. The kitchen felt smaller. The walls felt closer. Afua could hear her own breathing, and it sounded too loud. So I can't reach the father, Afua said slowly. Not through Dongchul, and Dongchul controls who reaches Junghyun. Dongchul screens the calls, schedules the meetings, manages the security detail. If you try to go around him, you end up like Moon. Then what do we... The kitchen door swung open. Both women went silent. Afua shoved the phone behind her back. Go reached for a ladle like she'd been stirring something the entire time. Soman stood in the doorway, school uniform, lunchbox at her hip, bangs falling across her right eye. She looked at Afua, looked at Go, looked at the space between them, which was charged with the specific electricity of a conversation that has been interrupted. "You're talking about Iyama," she said. Not a question, a statement. Delivered with the flat precision of a child who has spent 11 months listening to adults talk around her and has learned to read the shape of a conversation from the silence that surrounds it. Neither woman spoke. Soman walked into the kitchen. She pulled a stool from under the prep counter. She sat down. She placed the lunchbox on the table, and she looked at both of them with an expression that was not pleading and was not afraid and was not childlike in any way. It was the expression of a person who has been excluded from a conversation about her own life and has decided that the exclusion ends now. "I know who hurt Iyama," she said. "I've always known. I've known since the voicemail. I know the names. I know what Iyama said. I memorized every word." "Soman," Afua started. "I can't say it out loud. Imo said if I say the name, the same thing happens to Appa. She said they're listening. She said they hear everything." She paused. Her hands were flat on the table, small hands, a 7-year-old's hands, ink stains on the right index finger from a school pen, a bitten-down thumbnail, the faded bracelet on her ankle hidden under her sock that her mother tied there the week before she died. "But I never promised I wouldn't show someone." She opened the lunchbox, removed the kimbap compartment, lifted the false bottom, took out the phone, and pushed it across the table toward Go. Not toward Afua, toward Go. Because Afua was the person who sat down. But Go is Korean. Go can understand every word on that voicemail. Go knew Yuna. Go can hear what Afua cannot. This child had been waiting, not for someone to discover her secret, for someone she trusted enough to hand it to. She'd been sitting at table 9 for 11 months, humming her mother's last song, carrying 847 listens in a lunchbox, waiting for the right person to sit down so she could give them the weight she'd been carrying alone. Go took the phone. Her hands were shaking. She pressed play. And this time, a woman who spoke fluent Korean, who knew Yuna's voice as well as she knew her own, who had loved that voice for 34 years, listened to every single word. When the voicemail ended, Go set the phone down on the prep counter. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was stripped of everything except the truth. She names Dongchul. She names Iun Seo. She says Iun Seo brought them to the parking lot. She says Dongchul's men were waiting. She says she has the port documents in her car and they can't let her leave with them. Go looked at Somin. And she says she's sorry. She says she's sorry she didn't answer when you called back. Somin's face didn't change. She'd heard the voicemail 847 times. She knew every word. She'd been waiting for an adult to hear them too. "Somin," Go said softly, "you've been carrying this alone?" Somin looked at her lunchbox, at the tallies scratched inside the lid, at the 847 marks that represented 847 nights of pressing a cracked phone to her ear in the dark and listening to her dead mother's voice. "I was keeping Appa safe," she said simply. "That's what Iyama would have wanted." And Afua, sitting on a milk crate in a school kitchen at 4 a.m, holding a dead woman's testimony, looking at a 7-year-old who had been running a one-child intelligence operation for 11 months, understood something with absolute clarity. She was not going back to sleep. She was not going back to normal. She was not going back to being the invisible cook who stayed behind the line and sent money home and ate leftovers standing up. She had sat down, and sitting down had a cost, and she was going to pay it. Let me tell you about Baek Jung-hyun on a Tuesday evening in November. He is sitting in his office at the Gumsan Group headquarters in Gangnam. 6 screens, 11 feeds. His 3rd cup of coffee, which went cold 2 hours ago. The tie he put on that morning is somewhere on the floor. His sleeves are rolled to the elbow. He looks like a man who forgot to go home and didn't notice. Camera 4, the cafeteria, empty now because it's 7 p.m. and the school closed at 5. But Jung-hyun isn't watching the live feed. He's watching a recording from that afternoon. He's been watching it on loop for 90 minutes. On the screen, Somin at the prep counter, flour on her nose, her sleeves pushed up. Beside her, the cook, the Ghanaian woman, Afua. They're making something together. Afua is talking, gesturing with her hands, demonstrating a technique. Somin is watching with the focus of a surgical resident. Then Afua says something. The audio is too far from the microphone to catch, and Somin does something that makes Jung-hyun press pause. She laughs, not the polite exhale she gives Yoon-seo, not the performance she's learned to produce. The real laugh, the one that makes her shoulders shake and her head tip back and her whole face reshape itself into something that looks exactly, devastatingly, precisely like Yoona. Jung-hyun presses play, watches it again. Presses pause at the same moment, again, 8 times. He's memorizing it. The angle of her chin, the way her eyes close when the laugh peaks, the flour on her nose that she hasn't noticed because she's too busy being a child, which is the thing she hasn't been in 11 months. His phone buzzes. Dongchul. Sir, regarding the cook. Dongchul's voice is measured, careful. The voice of a man constructing a narrative 1 brick at a time. My team has flagged some concerns. She's been staying after hours, accessing the kitchen outside of her scheduled shift, spending unsupervised time with your daughter. There's no chaperone, no authorization from the school administration. I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting anything inappropriate, but from a security standpoint, this represents an unauthorized access point, a liability. Jung-hyun watched the screen. Somin was stirring something in a pot. Her face was serious, concentrated. She was saying something to Afua, correcting her, pointing at the pot with the authority of a tiny head chef who would not tolerate deviation from the recipe. She's cooking, Jung-hyun said. Sir? My daughter is cooking. She's standing in a kitchen and cooking with another person and correcting their technique. She's talking, Dongchul. She's talking and laughing, and she looks... He stopped. His throat had closed up. He waited until it opened again. She looks like Yoona. Silence on the line. Sir, I understand the emotional weight of this, but my responsibility is security, and leave the cook alone. Sir, I said leave her alone. He hung up, sat in the silence of his office, and then he did something he had not done in 11 months. He picked up his car keys. The drive from Gangnam to Incheon took 47 minutes in evening traffic. Jung-hyun drove himself. No driver, no security, just a man in a wrinkled suit driving a black sedan through the November dark toward a place he'd been avoiding since the worst day of his life. He pulled into the Daesung Academy parking lot at 8:12 p.m. The school was dark. The cafeteria windows were lit by the glow of the emergency exit signs, casting a faint green wash across the empty tables. He parked. Same spot. The same spot where Yoona's car was parked 11 months ago. Where they found her, where the concrete had been power washed 3 times and still carried a shadow that might have been a stain, or might have been Jung-hyun's imagination, or might have been the kind of mark that no amount of water can erase because some things are permanent whether you can see them or not. He sat in the car. He could see the cafeteria from here, 30 meters, through the glass. If he squinted, he could make out table 9, the table by the back wall. The table where his daughter ate lunch alone every day for 11 months while he watched from a screen in Gangnam and told himself it was enough. He called the school's main line. The after-hours security desk picked up. This is Baek Jung-hyun. Is my daughter still in the building? A pause. Typing. Yes, sir. She's in the cafeteria kitchen with the cook. The after-school program released her at 5, but she stayed. The kitchen staff confirmed she's supervised. What are they doing? Another pause, longer this time. The guard was probably checking the camera feed. "They appear to be cooking, sir, and your daughter is laughing." Jung-hyun closed his eyes. "Sir, is everything all right?" "Yes, thank you." He hung up. He put his forehead on the steering wheel. He stayed like that for a long time. 2 hours. The engine running because the November night was cold, and because turning it off meant committing to being here, and he wasn't sure he could commit to that yet. 2 hours of sitting in the parking lot where his wife died, listening to the engine idle, thinking about a stranger who did the one thing he couldn't do. She sat down. A cook. A temporary hire. A woman with no Korean and no power and no reason to care. She sat down at a table and made his daughter laugh, and he, Baek Jung-hyun, who owned the school and the cameras and the security system and the parking lot and probably the goddamn concrete, could not get out of his car. At 10:15, he drove home. Eunso had dinner waiting. She always did. The table was set. Candles. 2 place settings for the adults. 1 smaller setting for Somin. Doenjang jjigae in the pot. The way she made it every Wednesday, because it was Yuna's recipe, and Eunso had inherited the kitchen along with everything else. Somin sat at the table, lunchbox beside her chair. Eunso served the jjigae with the careful choreography of a woman who has turned domesticity into performance art. The steam rose. The smell filled the dining room. Everything looked warm and correct and loving. Somin tasted the jjigae. She put her spoon down. "It's wrong." Eunso's smile held, but the warmth behind it cooled by 2 degrees, a tightening at the jaw, a stillness around the eyes. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Ialma used gochugaru, the flakes. You use gochujang, the paste. They're different. The flakes give it texture. The paste makes it smooth. Ialma's was never smooth." Yoonseo's hand moved to the ladle. "I've been making it this way for months, Somina. You've never mentioned. I'm mentioning it now." The room went quiet. Jung-hyun, at the head of the table, looked up from his phone for the first time since sitting down. He looked at Somin. Something in her voice had caught his attention. Not the words, the tone, the flatness, the precision. A 7-year-old shouldn't sound like that. A 7-year-old should whine or pout or push the bowl away. She shouldn't deliver a culinary critique with the clinical detachment of a forensic analyst comparing evidence samples. Then Somin did something deliberate. She started humming. The funeral hymn, the custom arrangement, the melody she'd learned from her dead mother's voicemail. She hummed it clearly, steadily, looking directly at Yunseo across the table, not looking away, not blinking, holding eye contact with the woman who told her that silence was the only thing keeping her father alive. Yunseo's face went through 3 transformations in 2 seconds, warmth to recognition to something cold and tight and controlled. Her right hand moved to the gold locket at her throat, the one that contained the photograph of a child named Hyunwoo that nobody in the Baek household knew about. She gripped it. The chain pulled taut against the back of her neck, pulled tighter. A thin red line appeared where the chain cut into skin. A single drop of blood rolled down toward her collarbone. Somin watched the blood. She didn't look away. This was not a child humming a song. This was a 7-year-old running a test. Poking at the mask, measuring the reaction, seeing how far she could push before something underneath the performance broke through. Jung-hyun saw none of it. He was looking at his phone again. He'd already looked away, but Somin had gotten what she needed. The flinch, the blood, the grip on the locket. Yunseo knew the hymn. Yunseo recognized it. And now Somin knew that Yunseo knew she knew. The game had changed. The prey was watching the predator now. And the predator had no idea. Yunseo moved fast. Faster than Afua expected. Faster than Go predicted. And with the kind of surgical precision that told Afua this woman had been planning for contingencies long before anyone sat down at table 9. Thursday, 11:45 a.m. Lunch rush. Afua was at the serving line, ladling kongnamul guk into bowls with the mechanical efficiency of a woman who'd plated 400 lunches every day for 3 weeks. The cafeteria was its usual chaos, 300 children making 300 kinds of noise. She looked up and saw Yunseo, standing in the cafeteria entrance, cream coat, silk blouse, the exact right shade of concerned warmth on her face. She was carrying a canvas tote bag. Inside the tote bag, 3 jars of homemade kimchi, individually labeled with the names of kitchen staff members. Each jar had a small ribbon tied around the lid. Because of course it did. Yunseo walked directly to Afua, not to the kitchen, not to go, to Afua. "You must be the cook Somin tells me about," Yunseo said. Her English was accented but fluent. Her smile reached her eyes in a way that would convince anyone who wasn't looking for the seams. "I'm her aunt. I wanted to thank you personally. Somin has been different lately, lighter. I think that's because of you." She held out a jar of kimchi, red ribbon, Afua's name written on a small tag in careful hangul. "Please take this, a small thank you for being kind to our girl." Afua took the jar. It was heavy in her hand, cold glass against her palm. She looked at Yunseo's face and tried to see the woman on the voicemail, the woman who brought them to the parking lot. But all she saw was warmth and gratitude and the kind of beauty that comes from discipline rather than genetics. "Thank you," Afua said. Her voice sounded wrong to her own ears, too tight, too careful. "Of course." Yunseo touched Afua's arm, light, brief, the kind of touch that creates intimacy without crossing boundaries. "Take care of her for me." Then she left the cafeteria. She walked to the administrative wing. She sat down in the vice principal's office, and she filed a formal complaint, not against Afua specifically. Yunseo was too smart for that. A direct accusation would look personal. Instead, she filed a general safeguarding concern. "I've noticed that cafeteria staff appear to be having unsupervised, unauthorized contact with a minor student outside of structured school hours. I'm not accusing anyone of wrongdoing. I'm simply concerned that proper protocols aren't being followed. As the child's legal guardian within the household, I feel it's my responsibility to raise this." She said all of this with the gentle reluctance of a woman who hated to cause trouble. She touched her hair twice while she spoke. She apologized 3 times for bringing it up. The vice principal assured her that her concerns were valid and would be addressed immediately. Yunseo thanked him. She left a jar of kimchi on his desk, too. Green ribbon. By 2 p.m., Afua was called into the vice principal's office. The conversation lasted 9 minutes. It was polite. It was thorough. It was devastating. "Ms. Mensah, we appreciate your service. However, a concern has been raised regarding unauthorized after-hours contact between cafeteria staff and a student. Pending review, you'll be placed on administrative leave. You will not enter the kitchen or any student-accessible area until the review is complete. The process takes approximately 72 hours. And if the review doesn't clear me, your contract will be terminated. Your visa sponsor will be notified. Standard procedure." 72 hours. That was it. 3 days. After that, she'd be terminated, her visa sponsor would get a call, and the machinery of bureaucracy would do what Dongchul's men couldn't do openly: remove her. Cleanly, legally, without a single fingerprint that could be traced back to a woman in a cream coat who brought kimchi with ribbons. Afua walked out of the office and stood in the hallway and understood with perfect clarity that she had just been outmaneuvered by a woman who weaponized kindness the way other people weaponize knives. Yunseo hadn't accused her of anything, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't threatened. She'd simply activated a system, a school's own safeguarding protocols, and let the system do the cutting. Meanwhile, across the city, Yunseo was already at the Beck estate. Somin was at school. The house was empty except for the cleaning staff, who knew better than to be seen or heard when Yunseo was home. Yunseo moved through Somin's bedroom with the efficiency of someone who has searched this room before. Dresser drawers, under the mattress, inside the pillowcases, the closet shelf, the school bag, the shoe rack. She checked inside sneakers, behind books, under the bed frame. She unzipped every stuffed animal that had a zipper. She was looking for the phone. She didn't find it. Because Somin, 7 years old, 3'11", 41 pounds, had changed her hiding method. The phone was no longer in the lunchbox. It was strapped to her left calf, tucked inside a doubled-over sock, secured with a hair elastic she'd taken from Unseo's bathroom drawer. She'd made the switch 3 days ago, after dinner, after the Jjigae incident, after she saw Unseo's eyes flick to the lunchbox 1 too many times during the meal. Somin noticed. Somin always noticed. and she adapted with the cold, tactical instinct of a child who has been running her own survival operation for 11 months and understands, at a level most adults never reach, that the moment your enemy knows where you keep your weapon is the moment you move it. Yunseo searched for 40 minutes. She found nothing. She remade the bed with hospital corners, returned the stuffed animals to their exact positions, closed the drawers, left the room exactly as she'd found it, except for one thing, the closet door. She'd left it open 2 centimeters. Somin would notice. Somin noticed everything, and Yunseo didn't know that Somin had set the closet door at a specific angle that morning as a tell, the way a spy places a hair across a door jamb. 5:30 p.m. Last shift. Afua was in the kitchen. Her last shift before the suspension took effect at midnight. She was cleaning the prep counter, wiping it down the way she'd wiped it down every night for 3 weeks, in long strokes, left to right, the way her mother wiped down the Kelawale counter in Kumasi. Mechanical, rhythmic. The kind of motion you do when your hands need something to do, because if they stop moving, they'll start shaking and they won't stop. She heard the footstep. Small, bare feet on tile. She turned. Somin stood in the kitchen doorway, not in her school uniform anymore. She was wearing an oversized cream cardigan over leggings. No shoes. She must have come through the after-school program exit, crossed the courtyard, and entered through the kitchen service door. Alone. Without permission. Without telling anyone. She stood there for a long time, not speaking, not moving, just looking at Afua with those dark brown eyes that were too old for her face. Then she walked across the kitchen. Her bare feet made no sound on the tile. She reached Afua and she grabbed the hem of Afua's apron and she held on. Not a tug, not a pull, a grip. The way you hold the edge of a cliff when the ground is giving way. And she spoke. The longest sentence she had spoken in 11 months. Delivered in English, flat and precise, with no tremor and no tears and no variation in pitch. The voice of a witness on a stand. The voice of someone who has rehearsed what they need to say so many times that the words have been scraped clean of everything except their meaning. Don't leave me here with her. She hurt Iyama. I heard it on the phone. I hear it every night. I know what she did. I know who helped her. I know everything. Please don't leave me here. She didn't cry. Her face didn't change. Her grip on the apron didn't loosen. She stood there, 3'11", 41 pounds, barefoot on a kitchen floor, holding on to the only person who had sat down, and she delivered her testimony with the composure of a federal prosecutor and the desperation of a child who understood, with a clarity that should have been impossible at 7, that the woman cleaning this kitchen was about to be taken away, and that once she was gone, there would be no one left. Afua knelt down. She put her hands on Somin's arms. She looked her in the eyes. I'm not leaving. They're going to make you leave. Imo filed a complaint. I heard her on the phone. She told someone it would take 3 days. How do you know? I listen. I always listen. Nobody thinks I'm listening, but I always am. Afua held her. Not a hug. A hold. The kind you give someone who is falling. And over Somin's shoulder, she saw Go standing in the doorway of the dry storage room. Go had heard everything. Her face was a mask of fury and grief and something harder than both. Their eyes met, and in that look, without a single word spoken, 2 women made a decision. 3 days, 72 hours, the clock was running, and somewhere in a house that smelled like jasmine and white gardenia perfume, Yunseo was pouring herself a glass of wine and checking her phone and believing, with the satisfied certainty of a woman who has never been outmaneuvered by a child, that the problem was solved. She was wrong. She was so catastrophically wrong, because she had calculated for a cook and a head chef and a bureaucratic process. She had not calculated for a 7-year-old with a phone strapped to her calf and 847 reasons to stop being silent. Afua called her mother at 11 p.m. Seoul time, which was 2 p.m. in Kumasi, which meant Auntie Amma was at the market and would answer on the first ring because Amma Mensa had never in 61 years let a phone ring twice. Afua, you're calling on a weekday. Who died? Nobody died, Mama. Then somebody is about to. I can hear it in your voice. Sit down and tell me. Afua told her. Not everything. Not the syndicate, not the voicemail, not the 11 months of silence. She told her what her mother would understand. There is a child. She is in danger. The person hurting her is inside the house. And if I do something, I will lose my job, my visa, everything. Auntie Ama was quiet for a long time. Efua could hear the market behind her, the sounds of Kumasi, horns, voices, the clatter of metal bowls, the hiss of oil meeting plantain, the sounds of a world that was still turning even though Efua's had stopped. Then her mother said, Efua, vonimse, sevo hunuba, a oreren suomu navo devon tomaho asem haevo hoa, vo ai ade bone. The one who sees a child drowning and worries about getting their cloth wet has already chosen the wrong thing. I know, Mama. Then you know what to do. You've always known what to do. You just call me to make sure I'll still love you after you do it. Will you? Efua Mensa. I will love you when you have nothing. I will love you when they send you home. I will love you when the whole world decides you are foolish. Because foolish and wrong are not the same thing, and my daughter has never been wrong about a child. Not once. Now go. Efua hung up. She sat on her mattress in Bupyeong and stared at the wall and ran through every option she had left, which didn't take long because there were almost none. She could go to camera 7, stand in front of the cafeteria camera and hold up the phone the way Somin held the lunchbox, force Junghyun to see it. But she remembered what Somin told her. Appa watches from the cameras, but he never comes. The cameras were a wall, not a window. Junghyun had watched his daughter eat alone for 11 months and hadn't crossed the 30 meters from the parking lot to the cafeteria door. The cameras were his excuse not to be present. Showing him something on a camera would just give him another screen to hide behind. She could go to the police, but Go's story about the driver echoed like a warning shot. Moon Jae-sik tried to bring information to Junghyun through official channels. His car was found at Incheon Airport. He wasn't on any flight. If Dongchul could disappear a grown man who used proper channels, what would he do to a Ghanaian cook on a temporary visa who had no channels at all? She could run, take the phone, take the voicemail, get on a plane to Accra and send it to someone from a safe distance. But the phone had 11% battery and no charger, and the voicemail was the only copy, and Somin had entrusted it to her, not to a plan, not to a system, to her. Running was betrayal. Running was every adult who had ever looked away while a child sat alone. So Efua did the thing that nobody expected. Not Go, not Dongchul, not the viewer. The thing that was reckless and stupid and brave in the specific way that only someone whose critical flaw is an inability to calculate risk could be brave. She went to Yoon Seo's house, directly. No intermediary, no plan, no weapon. Just a woman in a kitchen uniform and borrowed sneakers knocking on the front door of a house in Songdo at 11:30 at night. Yoon Seo opened the door in a silk robe. Her hair was down, no makeup. Without the performance, her face looked different, thinner, older. The shadows under her eyes were deep enough to hold water. I know who you are, Yoon Seo said. Her voice was careful but not surprised. She'd been expecting something. Maybe not this. Maybe not a cook at her door at midnight, but something. I heard the voicemail, Efua said. I know what's on it. I know what your sister said before she died, and I've already sent a copy to a journalist. She hadn't. She didn't have a copy. She didn't know any journalists. The phone was in her jacket pocket with 11% battery and a cracked screen and no way to duplicate the recording even if she'd thought of it. It was a bluff, pure and complete. A lie built on nothing except the desperate hope that a guilty woman would believe it because guilty people always believe the worst is already happening. Yoon Seo stared at her. 5 seconds. 10. Efua braced for anger, for threats, for the door closing in her face, for the sound of a phone call to Dongchul. Instead, Yoon Seo broke. Not performed breaking. Not the controlled tears she deployed at school pickups and family dinners. Real breaking. The kind that starts in the diaphragm and works its way up through the chest and the throat and the face until everything cracks at once. She grabbed Efua's arm, not to hurt, to hold on. Her fingers dug into Efua's forearm and her nails bit through the jacket sleeve and her face collapsed into something so raw and wrecked that Efua took a step back from the force of it. You don't understand, Yoon Seo said, and her voice was destroyed. They have my son. They took Hyunwoo 14 months ago. Before Yuna, before any of it. They took my son, and they said if I didn't help them get to Yuna, they would kill him. They sent me his shoe, one shoe, a child's shoe, my baby's shoe. She pulled Afua inside, closed the door, pressed her back against it like she was trying to hold the house together with her body. I loved my sister. I loved Yuna more than anyone in my life except my son. She was my uni. She taught me to ride a bicycle. She held my hair when I was sick. She was at the hospital when Hyunwoo was born, and she cried harder than I did. Yoonseo's voice was tearing at the edges. And they told me to give them her schedule, her routine, what time she arrived at school, what time she left, which route she took, and I did it. Because my son was in a room somewhere and I didn't know where, and every day they sent me a photograph of him holding that day's newspaper to prove he was alive, and every day I gave them what they asked for, because what would you do? What would any mother do? She slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor. Her silk robe pooled around her. Her hands were shaking so hard they looked like they belonged to someone with a fever. I've been dying for 11 months, she whispered. Every day in that house, cooking Yuna's recipes for Yuna's daughter, brushing Yuna's daughter's hair, tucking Yuna's daughter into bed, and every night I go to my room and I open this locket and I look at Hyunwoo's face and I don't know if he's alive or dead because Dongchul stopped sending photographs 6 months ago. He just sends a text once a week, one word. Behave. That's it. Behave. Afua stood in the hallway of a house that smelled like jasmine and white gardenia perfume and looked at the woman she had come to accuse and saw something she was not prepared to see. A mother, not a villain, not a monster. A mother who had been given an impossible choice between her sister and her son, and had chosen her son and had been paying for it in flesh and sanity ever since. A woman who had committed an unforgivable act for a reason that any mother in the world would understand, which is what made it so terrible, because understanding doesn't erase the act, it just makes the act heavier. Where is Hyunwoo? Afua asked. I don't know. Dongchul moves him. He told me once that he was in Suwon, but that was months ago. I don't know if... Her voice broke completely. I don't know if my son is alive. Afua knelt down, eye level, the way she'd knelt for Somin. Then we need to... Headlights swept across the hallway wall. A car pulling into the driveway. Afua turned to the window. Through the sheer curtain, she saw a black sedan. A man getting out. Stocky. Glasses. Dark suit. Dongchul. He'd been watching the house. Of course he had. Yoonseo was an asset, and assets are monitored. He saw Afua arrive. He saw her go inside. And he understood instantly that it didn't matter whether her journalist's story was a bluff or the truth. The fact that the cook was here, in Yoonseo's house, at midnight, meant the operation was compromised. Yoonseo saw the headlights, too. Her face went white. You need to go. Now. The back door. Through the garden. There's a gate. Come with me. I can't. If I run, he'll kill Hyunwoo. If you stay, go. Afua went. Through the kitchen, through the garden, over a gate that scraped her palms raw. She ran through back streets in Songdo with no idea where she was going, just moving, just running, until the adrenaline made her hands shake so badly she could barely hold the phone. Behind her in the driveway, Dongchul was already on his phone. His voice was flat, efficient, the voice of a man placing a routine order. The cook was at Yoonseo's house. She knows. Clean it up. Both of them. Afua did not go home. Dongchul's people would be there. She didn't have the address of anyone she trusted. She didn't have money for a hotel. She had a phone with 9% battery in her pocket and a pair of bleeding palms, and the address of exactly one place in Incheon, where she knew the door would be unlocked, and someone would be standing on the other side. The school. She ran 7 blocks in the wrong direction before she figured out where she was. Then she ran 14 blocks in the right direction. Her lungs burned. Her hands stung from the gate. She got on the last bus of the night from Songdo Station and rode it to Bupyeong, transferred, rode another to Gulyeon, and walked the last 2 kilometers to Daesung Academy in the dark, with her jacket pulled over her head because she'd watched enough crime dramas to know that a black woman running through Incheon at midnight would be remembered. The school's service entrance was locked. She went around to the cafeteria loading dock. The dock door was heavy steel with a deadbolt. She banged on it. 3 a.m. The door opened. Go stood there in her kitchen whites, flour on her forearms, looking like she'd been expecting this exact knock at this exact hour. Get inside. Afua got inside. The kitchen was lit, warm, the ovens were on. Go had been baking, at 3 a.m., which meant Go hadn't gone home, which meant Go had been waiting, which meant Go had known, on some level, that whatever Afua was going to do would end with someone running. Afua told her everything: Yunseo, the confession, Hyunwoo, Dongchul's car in the driveway, the phone call she'd overheard through the garden gate, clean it up, both of them. Go listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react. She stood at the prep counter with her hands flat on the stainless steel, and her jaw set, and her eyes focused on a point somewhere past Afua's left shoulder, a point that existed only in the geography of a decision she'd been circling for 11 months. When Afua finished, Go moved. She locked the kitchen door. Both deadbolts. She pulled the emergency shutters down over the pass-through window. She turned off the kitchen's exterior lights. Then she picked up her phone and started making calls. 3 of them. Short. Rapid. Korean Afua couldn't follow. Names she didn't recognize. When Go hung up, her face had changed. Something had hardened. Something that had been soft and cautious for 11 months had finally calcified into action. "We have time," Go said. "Not much, but some." "How do you?" "Because Dongchul won't send his people to the school, not while Somin might be here. Touching Somin is the one line even he can't cross. Her father would burn the entire syndicate to ash if anyone laid a hand on that child. So they'll wait. They'll watch. They'll try to get you when you leave. We don't leave." 20 minutes later, the loading dock door rattled. 2 men. Afua recognized neither. They wore dark jackets and flat expressions and the specific body language of men who have been sent to do a thing and expect no resistance. Go walked to the kitchen door. She stood in front of it, 5'2", 58 years old, built like a woman who'd been hauling rice sacks and soup pots since before these men were born. Her hands were at her sides. She wasn't holding a weapon. She didn't need one. "I know who you work for," she said. Her voice carried through the steel door with a clarity that came from 34 years of being Yuna's friend and 11 months of being silent about it. "And I know who Yuna was. Before she married Jung-hyun, before any of this, Yuna was Choi Yuna, investigative journalist. She broke the Gimpo port scandal in 2019. She exposed the Mapo construction fraud in 2020. She won the Korean Press Foundation Award twice. Every reporter in Seoul knew her name, and every reporter in Seoul has been asking for 11 months why her murder was written off as random violence when she was actively investigating port-level financial fraud at the time of her death." She paused. "Let the silence do its work. I have the phone numbers of 6 journalists who covered her career, 3 editors, a producer at MBC, and a woman at the Hankyore who has been trying to reopen the case since May. If you touch this cook, if you enter this kitchen, if you make one more move toward this building, I will call every single one of them. By sunrise, there will be cameras at this gate and Shin Dongchul's name in every headline in this country." The 2 men looked at each other. They didn't leave, but they didn't enter. They stood on the loading dock like men recalculating a cost-benefit analysis in real time. Go turned back to Afua. Her voice dropped. "We have maybe 30 minutes before they decide the risk is worth it. Use them." Afua pulled out the phone. 8% battery. She navigated the contacts, Yuna's contacts, organized in Hangul that Afua could barely read. She scrolled, looking for something, anything. Then she found it. Bisang, emergency. A single contact labeled emergency. Not Junghyun's number, not the police, not a lawyer. A name, Han Seo-kyung. Afua pressed call. 2 rings, 3, 4. At 3:30 in the morning, the odds of anyone picking up were "Yoboseo," a woman's voice, alert, the voice of someone who sleeps with her phone on the pillow because she has been waiting for a specific call from a specific phone for a very long time. My name is Ifua Mensa. I don't speak Korean well. I found this phone. It belonged to Choi Yuna. There's a voicemail." "Stop." The woman switched to English, clean, precise. Columbia law, Ifua would learn later. Top of her class. "You're calling from Yuna's phone?" "Yes, her daughter had it. She's been hiding it for 11 months. There's a voicemail that names... I know what the voicemail contains. Yuna told me what she planned to record if things went wrong. She gave me this number 18 months ago and told me that if this phone ever called, it meant she was dead, and the evidence was still intact. Where is the child? She's here, at the school. Where is here exactly? Afua gave the address. Prosecutor Han was silent for 3 seconds, which was the time it took her to activate a protocol she'd built 18 months ago and never dismantled. Keep the phone on. I'm sending a team. Plainclothes first. Marked units behind them. 20 minutes. There are men outside. Dongchul's men. They won't be there in 20 minutes. Listen to me carefully. I need you to do one more thing. In the contacts, there's a number saved under Yobo. Call it. Yobo. Afua knew that word. Every Korean drama she'd watched on her phone in Bupyeong had taught her that word. It meant darling, sweetheart. The word you call the person you love most. Yuna had saved her husband's number under darling. Tell him, Prosecutor Han said, that his wife left him a message he never received. Tell him his daughter has been keeping it safe. Tell him to come to the school, now. The line went dead. Afua stared at the phone. 7% battery. She scrolled to Yobo. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Behind her, a sound. Bare feet on tile. Somin stood in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing the oversized cream cardigan. No shoes. She'd been in the after-school program room this entire time. She never went home. She never left the school. Because Somin didn't just notice things. She anticipated them. She'd seen Unseo file the complaint. She'd heard the phone call about 3 days. She'd calculated the timeline and understood, with the strategic clarity of a child who has been running her own survival operation for 11 months, that leaving the school meant going back to the house, and going back to the house meant being alone with Yunseo, and being alone with Yunseo after the complaint meant the endgame was approaching, so she stayed. She walked across the kitchen. She stood next to Go at the door. A 7-year-old girl and a 58-year-old woman, shoulder to hip, blocking a doorway. Not with force, with presence. With the specific immovability of 2 people who have decided that this is the line. On the other side of the door, Dongchul's men looked at each other. One of them reached for the handle, the other grabbed his arm. That's the Beck girl. The hand came off the handle, because Shin Dongchul could authorize a lot of things, but touching Baek Junghyun's daughter was the one order nobody would follow. Not for money, not for threats, not for anything. The cost of that mistake was extinction. Afua looked at Somin. Somin looked at the phone in Afua's hand. 7%. Call Appa, Somin said. 2 words. Quiet. Steady. The first time in 11 months she'd said his name without fear. Afua pressed call. The phone rang 4 times. On the 5th ring, Baek Junghyun picked up. He picked up because the caller ID showed a number he hadn't seen in 11 months, a number he'd memorized, a number that belonged to a phone that was supposed to be destroyed, lost, gone, a phone that his head of security told him was never recovered from the crime scene. His wife's phone was calling him. At 3:47 in the morning. For a full second, some irrational, impossible, grief-drunk part of his brain thought, she's alive. Yuna is alive and she's calling me, and the last 11 months were a nightmare I'm about to wake up from. Then a woman's voice, not Yuna's, accented English, shaking. Mr. Beck, my name is Afua Mensah. I'm the cook at your daughter's school. I'm calling from your wife's phone. Silence. The kind of silence that happens when a human being is processing information that doesn't fit into any existing framework. Your wife left a voicemail on this phone before she died. It's still here. Your daughter found the phone. She's been hiding it for 11 months. In her lunchbox. She's been carrying it to school every day and eating lunch alone so nobody would sit close enough to see it. She told me she was told that if she showed anyone the phone, you would die the same way her mother did. Nothing on the line, just breathing. The breathing of a man being unmade. Mr. Beck, your daughter has been keeping your wife's last words safe for 334 days. She strapped the phone to her leg with a hair elastic when she thought someone was getting too close to the lunchbox. She listened to the voicemail 847 times, and she kept a tally on the inside of the lunchbox lid. She's 7 years old, and she has been doing this alone because she believed her silence was the only thing keeping you alive. She heard something on the other end of the line. a sound she'd never heard before and hoped never to hear again. The sound of a man trying to speak and failing. Not a gasp, not a cry, something deeper. The sound of a foundation cracking. Then one word. Where? The school. We're in the kitchen. Your daughter is here. She's safe. But there are men outside. Dongchul's men. And there's a voicemail you need to hear. Your wife named the people who killed her. She named them Mr. Beck. She named Dongchul. And she named Yunseo. The line went dead. Jungyun drove from his house in Songdo to the school in Incheon in 11 minutes. A drive that should take 30. He ran 4 red lights and a stop sign, and he didn't notice any of them because the only thing in his mind was his daughter's face on the camera. Table 9. Back to the wall. Lunchbox at her hip. Humming. Every single day for 11 months. Humming a song he didn't recognize. Sitting in a blind spot she'd created by angling her body away from the camera. Hiding a phone under a false bottom she'd built from cardboard and tape. His daughter had been trying to tell him, and he'd been watching from a screen. He'd had 11 cameras and 6 monitors, and he'd missed everything because surveillance is not the same as seeing, and watching is not the same as being there. He arrived at the school parking lot at 3:58 a.m., the same parking lot, the same concrete. He didn't hesitate this time. He didn't sit in the car. He was out before the engine stopped and moving toward the cafeteria entrance at a pace that was somewhere between walking and running, the pace of a man who has spent 11 months being too late and is not willing to be too late for one more second. At the same time, from the opposite direction, a silver car pulled through the school's front gate. Yunseo. Dongchul had sent her. Get the child. Get the phone. End this. She didn't want to be here. Her hands were shaking on the steering wheel. But Dongchul's text was on her phone. One word. Behave. And behind Yunseo's car, at the service entrance, Dongchul himself arrived. Black sedan. 2 men with him. His calculation was simple. The cook was inside. The phone was inside. Prosecutor Han's team was 20 minutes out. That was enough time. But he had not calculated for Baek Jung-hyun. Jung-hyun reached the cafeteria first. He pulled the door open. The emergency lights painted everything in green and shadow. The kitchen door was at the far end of the hall. He could see the emergency shutters were down. He could hear voices behind the steel. He knocked. Once. Hard. Somin. Inside the kitchen, Somin heard her father's voice. She hadn't heard it this close in 11 months. He'd been a voice on a phone, a figure on the other side of a screen, a presence that she felt but couldn't touch. And now he was on the other side of a door, saying her name, and she didn't move. She stood next to Go with her hands at her sides and her back straight, and she looked at Afua. Let him in, Somin said. Go unbolted the door. Jung-hyun stepped into the kitchen. He was wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled white shirt and no shoes. He'd left the house without putting on shoes. His hair was uncombed. His face was wrecked. He looked like a man who had been disassembled and put back together wrong. He saw Somin. She saw him. 11 months of screens and cameras and silence and distance collapsed into the 12 feet of kitchen floor between them. He took a step. She didn't move. He took another. She watched him approach the way she'd watched everything for 11 months, carefully, measuring, reading. He knelt down, not because he chose to, because his legs gave out. He was on his knees on the kitchen tile, eye level with his daughter, and his hands were shaking and his eyes were full, and he didn't know what to say because what do you say to a child who carried your dead wife's testimony for 11 months while you watched from a screen and did nothing? Salman looked at him. Then she reached down. She pulled up her left sock, unwound the hair elastic, and pulled the phone from where it was strapped to her calf. She held it out, both hands, the way you present something sacred, the way her mother taught her to present food to elders, with both hands, with respect, with the full weight of what it means to give. Iyama left this for you, she said. I've been keeping it safe. Jung-hyun took the phone. His hands covered hers for a moment, small hands and large hands and a cracked Samsung between them. He pressed play. And Yuna's voice, 335 days dead, filled the kitchen. Jung-hyuna, Somin didn't answer. I'm leaving this for her. But if you're hearing this, it means she kept it. Listen. Yunseo Oni brought them to the parking lot. Dongchul's men are outside. I have the port documents in the car. They can't let me leave with them. I should have told you what I found. I should have told you about the embezzlement, about Dongchul, about the shipments. I didn't because I wanted to finish the story. That was my mistake. I'm a journalist, and my mistake was wanting to finish the story before I told my husband. I'm sorry. I love you. Protect Somin. She's everything. Then the singing. Amazing Grace. The Korean arrangement. Yuna's voice, steady despite everything, singing to her daughter's voicemail because she knew the next few minutes would be her last, and she wanted to leave one more thing, one more piece of herself, a melody Somin could carry. Sarangae. The voicemail ended. Younghyun was on the floor. His forehead was on the tile. The phone was pressed against his chest. He was making no sound. He was beyond sound. He was in the place that exists past grief, past rage, past language, the place where a man finally understands that his daughter has been humming her mother's death song at a lunch table every day for 11 months, and he heard it on the cameras and never asked what the song was. Outside, the loading dock door banged open. Dongchul's men had decided 30 minutes was enough. They were coming in, and behind them, Dongchul himself. And at the front entrance, Yunseo, walking toward the cafeteria with the mechanical obedience of a woman whose child's life depends on compliance. Somin heard the banging. She looked toward the door. Then she looked at her father on the floor. And something in her face changed. Not softened, hardened. The face of a child who has made a decision that no child should ever have to make. She took the phone from her father's hands, gently, the way you take something from a person who is drowning, and she walked out of the kitchen, through the cafeteria, past the tables, past table 9, through the double doors, into the parking lot, the same parking lot. Efua was behind her. Go was behind Efua. Jungyun stumbled to his feet and followed, shoeless on the concrete, and everything was converging. Dongchul from the loading dock, Yunseo from the front gate, Prosecutor Han's sirens in the distance, still 10 minutes out. Somin stood in the center of the parking lot. She didn't know it was the exact spot where her mother had been killed. Or maybe she did. Maybe she'd always known. Maybe that was why she faced the wall at table 9. Because the wall faced away from the parking lot. Because not looking at the place where your mother died is the only power a 7-year-old has. She held the phone above her head. Both hands. The way she'd held it out to her father. Sacred. Purposeful. A child holding a dead woman's testimony above her head like a torch. She pressed play, and the voicemail echoed across the parking lot, through the cracked speaker, thin and distorted and unmistakable. Yuna's voice naming names, Dongchul, Yunseo, the port documents, the parking lot, and then the singing, Amazing Grace in Korean, climbing and falling, filling the November air. Dongchul stopped walking. He heard his name in a dead woman's voice, and for the first time in the story, his face showed something other than calculation. It showed recognition. The recognition that a 7-year-old girl had held his fate in a lunchbox for 11 months, and he had dismissed her as noise. Jungyun heard it, standing barefoot on the concrete where his wife's blood had been washed away, hearing her voice name the men who killed her. Hearing her voice sing to their daughter, hearing her say Sarangae one last time, he didn't fall to his knees again. He stood. He stood the way a man stands when grief finishes destroying him and something else takes its place, something colder, something that has purpose. He looked at Dongchul. 15 years of trust, 15 years of delegated security and managed access and controlled information. 15 years of a man standing at his right hand, telling him which cameras were corrupted, which evidence was lost, which meetings were necessary, which people were threats. Dongchul looked back, and for a moment, the two men existed in a space beyond language, a space where everything had already been said, and the only question left was what happened next. Dongchul moved toward Somin, not with a weapon, with his hand extended, reaching for the phone, reaching for the cracked Samsung that contained the only recording of a dead woman naming her killers. If he could get the phone, destroy it. The voicemail was gone. Yuna's testimony was gone. It was all gone. Efua stepped between them, a Ghanaian cook, 5'7", flour under her nails, no weapon, no authority, no legal standing. A woman on a suspended contract with a revoked visa who had no business being in this parking lot, in this country, in this story. She stood between Dongchul and Somin, and she didn't say a word. She just stood. The way she'd stood at table 9. The way she'd sat down when nobody else would. She didn't need to be big or armed or powerful. She just needed to be there, and she was there. Dongchul's hand dropped. Not because of Afua, because behind Afua, behind Somin, from every entrance to the parking lot, headlights were appearing. Black sedans, the Jumsun Syndicate's vehicles, Jungyun's men, the ones who answered to Jungyun directly, not to Dongchul. The ones Jungyun had called from the car. They arrived. 12 men. They surrounded Dongchul. And Dongchul understood, with the specific clarity of a man who has miscalculated fatally, that the game was over. But the game was not over. Because Jungyun wasn't looking at Dongchul, he was looking at Yunseo. Yunseo stood at the edge of the parking lot in her silk robe and bare feet. She'd come straight from the house. She hadn't changed, she hadn't calculated. She'd simply obeyed because Dongchul texted, "Behave," and obedience was the only thing keeping Hyunwoo alive. Jungyun walked toward her. His men parted for him. The parking lot was silent except for the distant sound of Prosecutor Han's sirens, still 5 minutes out. The voicemail had stopped playing. The last note of Amazing Grace hung in the air like smoke. He stopped 3 feet from Unseo, close enough to see her face, close enough to see the locket at her throat, close enough to see the thin red line where the chain had cut her neck on the night Somin hummed the hymn at the dinner table. "You were in the parking lot," he said. His voice was flat, stripped of everything except the truth. "Yuna named you. You brought them to her." Unseo was shaking. Full body tremors. Her teeth were chattering, but she didn't run. Where would she run? Her son was in a basement apartment somewhere in Suwon, and running would be the last thing she ever did for him. "Yes," she said. One word. The word she'd been holding for 11 months. The word that weighed more than her body. "You lived in my house. You cooked for my daughter. You tucked her into bed. You told her that if she spoke, I would die." Yes. Jungyun's jaw was rigid. His hands were balled at his sides, white-knuckled. Afua could see the violence gathering in his body like a storm system building pressure. This man had spent 11 months behind screens because he was afraid of what he'd feel if he let himself feel. Now he was feeling everything at once, and the everything was pointing directly at the woman standing in front of him. He gave the order. One word. Korean. A word Afua didn't understand. But she understood the movement. 2 of his men stepped forward. Yunseo screamed. Not the way adults scream when they're afraid for themselves. The way a mother screams when she sees the thing she's been holding together finally falling. The scream tore out of her from somewhere primal, somewhere that existed before language, before thought, before any of the performance she'd built to survive. "Hyunwoo!" The name hit the parking lot like a detonation. Every person stopped. Jungyun's men, Dongchul's men. Go, standing at the kitchen door, Afua, standing between worlds, everyone. Yunseo collapsed. Her knees hit the asphalt. Her hands hit the asphalt. She was on all fours, shaking, screaming her son's name into the concrete where her sister had died. "They took my son 14 months ago, before Yuna, before any of it. Dongchul took Hyunwoo and said if I didn't help them get access to Yuna's routine, he would kill my child. He sent me Hyunwoo's shoe. One shoe, a 5-year-old's shoe, and I did it. I gave them what they wanted because what would you do? What would you do if someone had Somin?" She looked up at Junghyun. Her face was destroyed. Mascara and tears and the raw material of a woman who has been pretending for 11 months and has finally run out of pretend. "I loved my sister. I will love my sister until the day I die and every day after that, and I chose my son over her. And I would do it again, and I will never forgive myself, and you will never forgive me, and I am not asking you to." Junghyun stared at her. His hands were still balled at his sides, white-knuckled. His men were still waiting for the signal, and Afua could see the war happening behind his eyes. Grief versus grief. His wife versus her son, justice versus mercy, the calcified rage of 11 months pressing against the unbearable recognition that this woman had faced the same impossible choice he feared every day. What would you sacrifice to protect your child? He didn't soften. "She helped them kill Yuna," he said to his men. "Take her." And Afua moved. She stepped between Junghyun and Yunseo, the same way she'd stepped between Dongchul and Somin. The same way she'd walked across a cafeteria and sat down at a table where she had no business sitting. Because Afua Mensah does not calculate risk. She sees a person drowning and she moves. It's her greatest flaw and her greatest strength, and in this moment they are the same thing. There are 2 children who need saving today, she said. Not one. Yours and hers. Jung-yeon looked at her. The cook. The temporary hire. The woman from Kumasi who fried chin-chin at 3 a.m. because the smell of nutmeg reminded her of home. She was standing between a Mafia boss and his sister-in-law on a parking lot stained with his wife's memory, and she was telling him what to do. You don't know what I know exactly what she did, and I know there's a 7-year-old boy in a basement somewhere in Suwon who has been waiting 14 months for his mother to come get him. And I know that if your wife were standing here right now, she would not let a child die to punish his mother. You know that too. Don't speak for my wife. I'm not speaking for your wife. Afua didn't move. I'm speaking for the child. Silence. The sirens were closer now, Prosecutor Han's team 2 minutes out. The parking lot was held in a suspension that felt like the entire world had paused to wait for one man's decision. Then a voice, small, clear, coming from behind Afua. Appa. Somin, standing in the parking lot, phone still in her hands, looking at her father with the steady, unblinking gaze she'd perfected over 11 months of watching adults fail her. Hyunwoo is my cousin, she said. Iyama would save him. 9 words. That was all. 9 words from a child who had spent 11 months in silence because she was told her voice would kill her father. 9 words that used the only authority Baek Jung-hyun could not override. Not the authority of logic, not the authority of power, the authority of a dead woman whose name still governed this family from the grave. Iyama would save him. Jung-hyun looked at his daughter, at the phone in her hands, at the cracked screen and the 847 tallies scratched inside a lunchbox lid. At the girl who had carried his wife's voice against her body for 11 months and sat at a table facing a wall and hummed a funeral hymn every single day waiting for someone, anyone, to sit down. His hands opened, slowly, finger by finger. Find the boy, he said to his men. His voice was hoarse, ruined. Suwon, Dongchul's network, every safe house, every property, every address connected to his operation. Find the boy and bring him out alive. They found Hyunwoo at 4:27 a.m. A basement apartment in Suwon, 3 blocks from a convenience store. 7 years old, thin, dehydrated, alive. Sitting on a mattress on the floor with a single blanket and a pile of children's books that someone, maybe even one of Dongchul's men who still had enough humanity left to feel guilty, had brought him. When the door opened and the men came in, and one of them said, "We're taking you to your Iyama," Hyunwoo said. "Is she okay? She hasn't come in a long time. I thought she forgot." She didn't forget. She'd been across the city, cooking her dead sister's recipes, brushing her dead sister's daughter's hair, tucking her dead sister's daughter into bed, performing love for one child while being consumed alive by the absence of another. Dongchul was arrested at 4:31 a.m. Prosecutor Han's team executed the warrant. He didn't resist. He sat in the back of the police car with his hands in his lap and his glasses slightly crooked and his face completely blank. The face of a man who had bet everything on the assumption that a 7-year-old was too young to be a witness and lost. Yoon Seo turned herself in. She didn't wait for the handcuffs. She stood up from the asphalt, wiped her face, and walked to the police car under her own power. Before she got in, she looked at Somin, the child she'd terrorized for 11 months. The child she'd told that speaking would kill her father. The child she'd loved, in her own broken, insufficient way, because Somin had Yuna's face, and loving Somin was the only way Yoon Seo could still touch her sister. "I'm sorry," Yoon Seo said. Somin looked at her. She didn't forgive. She didn't condemn. She looked at her aunt with the gaze of a child who has already processed more than most adults will in a lifetime and has arrived at a place beyond anger. "Hyunwoo is okay," Somin said. "They found him." Yoon Seo's face collapsed again. But this time the collapse had something in it that the other collapses didn't. Relief. The first real breath she'd taken in 14 months. She got in the car. The door closed. The car pulled away. And in the parking lot of Daesung International Academy, at 4:43 in the morning, Baek Jung-hyun picked up his daughter. He picked her up the way you pick up something you thought was lost. Both arms, all the way. pressing her against his chest so tightly that she could feel his heartbeat and he could feel hers, and for the first time in 11 months there was no screen between them, no camera, no glass, no distance. Somin didn't cry. She put her arms around his neck. She pressed her face into his shoulder, and she hummed the hymn, her mother's voice, carried in her daughter's body, filling the space between a father and a child who had finally stopped hiding from each other. Afua stood at the edge of the parking lot, alone. Her palms were still bleeding from the garden gate. Her kitchen uniform was streaked with flour and sweat and the residue of a night she would never be able to explain to anyone who wasn't there. Go appeared beside her, handed her a cup of barley tea from the kitchen. They stood together in the dark and watched a father hold his daughter and said nothing because there was nothing to say. 3 weeks later, Afua Mensah was escorted to Incheon International Airport. Her temporary work visa had been revoked. Dongchul's arrest triggered an immigration audit, and the audit flagged her employment irregularities, and the system that had been weaponized to remove her was now removing her through different channels for different reasons, with the same result. No dramatic farewell, no scene at the school, just a woman with one suitcase walking through departure gates at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday. She didn't look back. She'd learned from her father's funeral that looking back makes leaving impossible, and sometimes you have to leave to survive. She flew to Accra, took a bus to Kumasi, walked through the door of her mother's house at sunset, and Auntie Amma took one look at her face and said, "Sit down, I'll make kelawela," and that was enough. That was everything. 6 months passed. Afua worked in her mother's kitchen. She ground pepper, she fried plantain, she taught neighborhood children to make chin-chin on Saturday mornings, and she didn't talk about Seoul, and she tried very hard not to think about Table 9, and she failed at that every single day. Then the phone rang. Afua. Go's voice, unchanged. Go's voice would sound exactly the same during an earthquake, during a wedding, during the end of the world. "I'm retiring. The school needs a new head cook. I told them there's only one person." "Madam Go, my visa was revoked. I can't." "There's an envelope at the Osu post office. Pick it up." She hung up. Because Go didn't do long conversations, and she didn't do explanations, and she definitely didn't do goodbyes. Ifua took a trotro to Accra, found the post office, found the envelope. Inside, a work visa, new, valid, sponsored by Daesung International Academy. The processing notation read, "Protected witness accommodation, arranged through the office of Prosecutor Han Seo-kyung, not charity, legal standing." The system that had expelled her was now, through a different channel, inviting her back. A letter from Go, one line, in Korean that Afua could now, after 6 months of language apps and stubbornness, mostly read, "Your kitchen is waiting," and a photograph. Afua held it up to the light coming through the post office window. The Daesung cafeteria, lunch hour, every table full, 300 children making 300 kinds of noise, trays and milk cartons, and the chaos of a world that was working. But at table 9, back wall, one chair was empty, a tray sat in front of the empty chair. On the tray, a single piece of chin-chin, golden brown, dusted with sugar and nutmeg. Salmon was sitting across from the empty chair. She wasn't looking at the camera. She wasn't looking at the room. She was looking at the chair. Her lunchbox was beside her, but it was open now, unzipped, nothing hidden inside it. Just a kimbap roll and a juice box and the ordinary contents of an ordinary child's lunch. Her hands were on the table. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her bangs had been trimmed. Someone had been taking her for haircuts. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting that was careful and practiced, the letter shaped with the deliberate precision of a child who had been working on her penmanship for months specifically for this moment. Day 197. I'm still saving your seat. Day 197. She'd been counting. The way she counted 847 voicemails. The way she counted 334 days of silence. Because Baek So-min quantifies love. She measures it in numbers because numbers are the one language that never lied to her. Numbers don't betray. Numbers don't perform. Numbers don't smile at you while hiding a knife. 847 listens, 334 days, 197 days of an empty chair with chin-chin on a tray, 197 days of faith. Afua stood in the Osu post office with a photograph in one hand and a plane ticket in the other, and tears running down her face and her mother's voice in her head, saying the thing she'd always said, the thing that started all of this, the thing that would end it. The world will teach you to look away. Your job is to refuse. If this story broke your heart and put it back together a little different than before, besties, then we did something right here today. Because at the end of it all, the bravest thing in this story wasn't the voicemail or the prosecutor or the parking lot. It was a woman who sat down. That's it. She sat down at a table where nobody else would sit, and everything that happened after that, every confession, every arrest, every child saved, happened because one person refused to let a 7-year-old eat lunch alone. Subscribe, because the next story, it's already waiting for you. And somewhere out there, there's an empty chair and a piece of chin-chin and a child who's been counting the days. Day 197. She's still saving your seat.